Throughout the Halo games, there are plenty of alien creatures of all shapes and sizes and aggressions with tools and weapons to take a player out should they not pay attention. The Covenant's offense is good, but their defense is even better. And in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the defense of the alien invaders. From the surface of Halo to the farmlands of Reach, this is the evolution of the Jackals. If you enjoyed the video, a like and comment goes a long way in helping the video reach its audiences. Subscribe if you enjoy the content. And now, let's get started, yeah? In 2001, Halo Combat Evolved was unleashed on the world, and it changed console shooters forever. But what was it about the first Halo that was so fun? In my opinion, a first-person shooter is only as good as its enemies. After all, where would Doom be without its iconic menagerie of demons? Half-Life without its extra-dimensional creatures? What did Halo have? Well, Halo had the Covenant, a religious alien threat that was on the verge of wiping out the human race. Their gods called for humanity's destruction, and nothing could be done to stop their holy war. The Covenant were an excellent enemy foe, with many creatures that took on different roles in combat. Though Bungie didn't land on the characters that we know and love, or fear, in one attempt. It took lots of iteration, concepting, and probably a ton of arguing and grudges formed to land the game's final combat loop. This is what happened to the Covenant foot soldier called the Jackal. Many designs and ideas were drawn up during the development as the game's vision took shape. Some concepts leaned into a beetle or bug-like frame. Others were more lizard-like. But as time went on, the design began to zero in on something quite unique. The Jackals of Halo Combat Evolved are thin creatures, defined by their massive glowing energy shields, skin covered in alien tattoos, stylish mohawks, big jewel-like eyes, and of course, a long dog-like face with a set of nostrils on each side of the snout. Crooked stained teeth line their mouths, and there's some odd glands on their necks which just complete the alien look of the creature. They wear simplistic body armor to cover their chest, legs, and, hooves? And on their arms are braces, one of which carries the shield emitter. They can also be seen in grayish helmets that, when combined with their tattooed arms and large eyes, gives them an almost skeletal appearance. They come in two different skin tones, dark blue for the Jackal miners who sport blue shields, and then orange skin for the higher-ranking Jackals that use the yellow shields. Complete with incredibly expressive and readable animations for the time, and a distinct but simple chatter and bark sound effect provided by Marty O'Donnell during combat. The details of the first Halo's Jackal fell into place, giving the creature its battlefield identity. The Jackals fill an important niche that rounds the gameplay out. The Covenant grunts are your cannon fodder, weak on their own but in large numbers, easily able to soften a player up for larger enemies to take down. The Hunters are heavy units, dangerous at a distance with their plasma cannons but bumbling and easy to take out up close. The Elites are field commanders, equipped with the same abilities and speed as the player. Now the Jackals, they're the support. The backup, strategically shuffling around using their energy shields to block and reflect any incoming ballistic fire, so don't bother trying to drain their shields unless you have a handy plasma weapon in your pocket. They're also far more effective than the grunts with their plasma pistols, firing quicker, more accurately, and even overcharging their shots to drain the player's shields, giving them a unique offensive ability no other Covenant has. There is more than one way to skin a Jackal, though. Lobbing a grenade at their feet can certainly get them some airtime. And if they don't dodge fast enough, some well-placed rockets or even a vehicle is more than enough to break their line and send them fleeing. A popular trick for new players to the series is to turn the plasma pistol against the Jackals. An overcharged plasma pistol shot is more than enough to take that energy shield down. The most notorious weakness to a Jackal's defenses, though, are the openings on the side of their shields where they poke their little gun out. But if you're feeling particularly aggressive, the assault rifle of Halo 1 has the fastest melee speed in the game, so a series of rapid melee attacks will make the poor creature buckle, letting you tear into their exposed bodies with a magazine full of hurt. If a defenseless Jackal is given enough time to flee from a fight, its energy shield gauntlet will recharge, letting the Jackal rejoin the fight in full force. So don't give them too much time to recover if you see them packing with their fellow grunts. During this era, the Jackals were not really well defined outside of the Fall of Reach book that was released a month before the game hit store shelves. Like most game companion books, The Fall of Reach helped build the world of the game that players would soon be jumping into. In the book, decades prior to the game, the Jackals unintentionally strengthened the Master Chief after his team recovered an intact Jackal shield and turned it over to UNSC hands. This led to the creation of the Master Chief's energy shield, which gave players the edge they had in combat during the actual game. Cool, right? The Jackals of Halo Combat Evolved were a simple idea, but that simplicity is why they work so well. A defensive ingredient that keeps the combat loop fresh. Something to push back on the player and encourage them to think with their brains rather than their guns. With an incredibly expressive and satisfying set of animations, unique design, and pitch-perfect tuning in combat, the Jackals of Halo CE were a hit. After the success of Halo Combat Evolved, a franchise was born. Books about Halo became bestsellers. A toy line from Joyride was released in stores, and anticipation for the sequel was so high that many were saying Halo was on the verge of jumping into pop culture and becoming the next Star Wars. With a focus on strong production value, it was important that Halo 2 looked like an upgrade over the first game, and Bungie artist Shi Kai Wang used this as an opportunity to redesign many of the characters he personally felt were lacking in Halo 1. Out of all the creatures, the Jackal saw the heaviest update. The Jackals of Halo 2 are far higher in quality, with more depth and detail enhanced by extremely clever use of normal maps and specularity. The head shape from Halo 1 was completely remodeled, now appearing far smaller with a snout that makes the head look a bit like the head of an actual real-life jackal, or at least if a jackal was merged with a bird, which was the goal according to Sheik. You see, he was never too happy with the look of the Halo 1 jackal. He felt it didn't quite stick the landing for the kind of creature he was trying to design, and this is apparently much closer. The jackal's eyes were made far less murky and instead appear bloodshot and crazy, with a bright pink glow to them, a stylistic choice to make their eyes stick out in dark places for atmospheric and gameplay reasons. The classic, thick, crooked teeth of Halo Combat Evolved were swapped out for some razor-thin ones, and as for their iconic mohawk, well, Sheik wanted the Halo 2 Jackals to have thick, rough hair, but obviously, due to technical limitations with the original Xbox, the Jackal's hair was changed back to the quill-like look from Halo 1. Man, what could have been? The dark skin was also brightened up quite a bit, most likely to help them stand out in dark environments, and also help their new armor stand out. Armor that even comes with gold accents for the major rank to complement their shields. The nostrils on each side of the Jackal's head were given a bit more definition, but sadly, the cool tribal tattoos are completely gone, which is a choice I still really dislike. It's also worth noting that the Jackal's body structure is also a bit different. The neck is a bit longer, shoulders are less broad, etc. According to Jamie Griesmer, another veteran of Bungie, the reason for the changes were artistically motivated, but also, weirdly enough, for Halo's new toy line. The truth is, the body and proportions for the Halo 2 Jackal just made for a far more articulate toy. Game production is interesting, right? Jackals of Halo 2 are far more dog-like in motion, such as the way they'll stalk towards the player from behind their shields or take off across the battlefield, sprinting to get to the action. The Jackals of Halo 2 also drew inspiration heavily from popular depictions of dinosaurs in blockbusters at the time, specifically the Velociraptor. You can see a bit of Jurassic Park in the way they cock their heads inquisitively, searching for prey when not engaged in combat. Overall, they just have this interesting blend of different creatures that makes the Jackal come across like an animal that's just barely holding back serious predator instincts. They mostly serve the same gameplay function, being defensive backup for the elites and new leader units, brutes, while being a general nuisance for the player with their specialized ability to overcharge the plasma pistol. A neat heat distortion effect even rises from the surface of the shield when it's struck, a bit of detail that makes the Jackal feel more reactive to the world around it. During the development, some ideas were thought up, such as giving the Jackals the ability to absorb damage taken through their shields and then expel it back at the player. Who knows what other countless ideas were discussed. But beyond the standard shield rank, a new rank, the Sniper Jackal, was introduced that became notorious for its rather punishing balancing choices. On lower difficulties, the Jackal Sniper provides fun moments of dodging shots and counter-shooting. But on higher difficulties, the quick reaction time and one-shot kill nature of their Covenant beam rifle means that players have very little time to react before a clean headshot ends your fun. Is it a choice that promotes the strongest gameplay loop? Probably not, but the moments of extremely high tension do get the blood pumping. Best part of the Jackal Sniper though? If you can close the gap, they'll fling their beam rifle to the ground and flee in terror. I can't deny that the Jackals of Halo 2 don't do much wrong outside of just subjective nitpicks, such as their tendency to get hyper-fixated on shooting at the player's last known position if you're able to duck behind cover and they lose sight of you, as well as just not moving about quite as much as combat evolved. A holdover from when Halo 2 was a more tactical shooter during development. Their new designs, while quite a bit different, are a natural evolution of the creature that came before. Their new, more expressive bodies were put to great work in the game's cutscenes, whether they're screaming like feral animals from behind bars, begging for a slice of meat, or just generally doing something a bit birdy. Despite my love for the original Jackal design in Halo 1, Halo 2's new, updated Jackal is a more striking and eye-catching creature, and this would be the basis that all future Jackals would be built upon, a successful evolution of the design, if you ask me. In 2007, Halo 3 was released on the new Xbox console, the Xbox 360. Thanks to the increased horsepower, Bungie was able to flesh out their world with state-of-the-art lighting and color grading, impressive special effects and physics simulations, and, of course, an opportunity to iterate on Halo's various characters and creatures, giving them new life on the new hardware. The Jackals of Halo 3 are just the next step in the creature's march towards discovering a permanent, final shape for itself. While Halo combat evolved in Halo 2 were a blend of dog, dinosaur, and bird-like features, the Jackals of Halo 3 take the dinosaur and bird traits and crank them up to 11. Gone is the dog-like snout, replaced with a massive crooked beak with lots of scarring and twisted skin stretched over thick facial bones. With no lips to speak of, the Jackal of Halo 3 has a permanent, disgusting snarl, showing its new canine-like teeth to preserve a bit of that dog DNA. The weird side nostrils were moved to the front of the beak, and the bloodshot, glowing, manic eyes of Halo 2 are now glassy and milky, with a faint, goofy pupil staring blankly into the distance, making the creature look a bit bird-brained, for lack of a better term, and diseased. Their skin is noticeably more reptilian than previous incarnations, with a blotchy, discolored, and almost sunburnt look. The red glands on the sides of their necks are completely gone, much to my sadness, and their torsos are noticeably shorter now, but with legs being far longer, giving them a pretty leggy look, especially when walking around with their head bobbing like a bird. The Jackal's bodysuit is now dark in color, leaning towards the bluish-purple look of the Covenant no matter the rank of the Jackal, with their new improved energy shields also coming in blue for the minors and fuchsia for the majors. This change was most likely done to help both Jackal ranks stand out against the new, more naturalistic lighting style and more earth tone environments of Halo 3. Shi Kai Wang also recalled that the artists wanted to better align all of the Covenant's technology and colors under a similar, cool-colored alien look. Going back to that shield for a second, it was given a downright beautiful animated texture that pulsates in a beautiful alien way. A healthy amount of bloom when indoors also helps give it a more authentic, energy-based look, and the effects it gives off when taking damage, deactivating, activating, etc. have never looked better. During gameplay, the Jackals of Halo 3 are extremely similar to their Halo 2 incarnations. They have the same sprint ability, many of the same mannerisms and animations, though it should be said, their animations aren't quite as polished looking due to the animations not suiting the new body proportions of the Jackal as much as their Halo 2 counterparts. Those long legs are constantly clipping and glitching into each other in strange ways, and their death animations always seem to end with the Jackal just sinking through the floor before busting a sweet dance move. Their voices also saw a pretty dramatic change. Complementing their less scrawny and more diseased bird-like reptile look, the Jackals of Halo 3 have a deeper, gravelier voice. They now growl like a crocodile to themselves, chatter with a heavily modulated and alien-sounding filter over their voices, and when spotting an enemy, they let out a bark that any Halo player will tell you is permanently burnt into their brains forever. Wodada indeed. They fight with many of the same tendencies and tactics from the previous game, acting as mobile cover for their grunt and brute comrades, but the Jackal sniper saw quite a few tweaks to make it a fairer foe to fight against. Firstly, the Jackal sniper was given a tactical headset, or beak set, I guess, that gives off a distinct Covenant purple glow when the Jackal sniper spots a target. On lower difficulties, they can commonly be seen with carbines, which makes them a great way to restock the carbine during campaign runs. Want to know something a bit odd though? Jackals typically have shield emitters firmly attached to their wrist, but in the case of the Jackal sniper, that shield emitter seems to have a mind of its own, floating about in odd ways. Explain, Bungie. The Jackals of Halo 3 have no real problems about them, but I find myself struggling to remember any unique encounters with them. They're just not used that creatively. Halo 3 doesn't really have its Jackals in the courtyard moment, you know? Halo 3's sister game, on the other hand, ODST, is far more inventive with how it uses its Jackals. Set during the events of Halo 2, the ODST-focused spin-off game lets players loose in the ruined city of New Mombasa, trying to find their lost squad and survive the Covenant occupation. Jackal snipers stalk the rooftops, looking for survivors to pick off, with the ominous, distant glow of their headsets being their only giveaway. A couple changes to note are that, number one, the Jackal sniper, it doesn't have a shield emitter anymore. Good job, Bungie. But also, rather interestingly, the Jackal's shields no longer emit any effects outside of a cheap-looking impact effect when they're struck by bullets. A downgrade from Halo 3 that is just a bit odd. No reason to cry over spilled milk, though. It's also around this time that Halo cemented the idea that the Jackals were a mercenary and self-serving species, detailing their race as scavengers and profiteers. Like the pirates of Earth's history, Jackals raid the weak for anything they can flip to make a quick buck on the alien black market or use to pursue higher prizes. The Jackals serve the Covenant not because they completely believe in the religious teachings of the Holy Prophets. It's more about the scavenging opportunity that the Covenant's Holy War gives them. The brutes serve the prophets because they foolishly believe in their great journey. The grunts serve because of fear.
Hey, he's gonna kill me! No!
The jackals? The jackals are like vultures, picking at and stuffing themselves on the remains of whatever ruined world the Covenant leave behind. The hub world of New Mombasa is a corpse being picked apart by the Covenant occupiers. Grunt patrols roam the streets. Covenant drones sleep in underground service tunnels. And jackals perch on rooftops or hobble down deserted alleys, eyes peeled for any poor survivors unlucky enough to be spotted. Quite fitting behavior for their new appearance, don't you think? The Jackals of Halo 3 are just the next step in the Jackals' evolution and marching the creature closer to a design that would become iconic. In 2010, Bungie released Halo Reach, the final game in their run on the Halo franchise. It made use of a new upgraded engine that supported higher quality models, more complex particle effects and AI systems, bigger battlefields, and tools for more complex character animations to make the world of Halo feel more real than ever before. The game told a story about humanity discovering, too late, that the Covenant had found Reach and had already begun the invasion of the planet. At the start of the game, your squad, Noble Team, is called to a farming region of the planet where a communications outpost suddenly, stopped communicating. The local wildlife is spooked. Farmers are nowhere to be seen. Buildings and vehicles are burning, and there's a sense that the squad is being watched. After finding a group of farmers hiding in a local house, one of the farmers explains that a monster in the field killed his son, and the night prior, a neighboring farm was attacked. After Noble Team finds the remains of torture victims, and of course, lots of blood in empty houses, they stumble upon the monster that killed the farmer's son, and that's when players are introduced to the Jackals of Halo Reach. The Jackals of Halo Reach come in two forms: the standard jackal, and a brand new subspecies of the jackal race, the skirmisher. And there are so many differences between the two creatures that are just fascinating. First up, the Jackals of Halo Reach are a masterpiece in creature design. Their new Reach look keeps all the hallmarks of the Halo 3 design intact while modifying the proportions and improving the level of detail, smoothing out all those rough edges that the old Halo 3 model had. Their trademark bulb-like eyes are far less milky, with some nice eyelids this time. The tops of their heads now have some adorable white freckles, with their quills getting some pretty sweet blue frosted tips. The Jackal snipers even got an updated headset, properly giving them that Sam Fisher if bird look. Their armor and shields were given more muted colors to fit the grittier atmosphere of the game, and alongside higher quality textures and materials for the armor itself, Majors were given some pretty neat shoulder pads, in case the big red energy shield wasn't enough of a hint that that was a Major. Oh yeah, you probably noticed that the Jackal Major now uses a red energy shield. And when sustaining damage, this red energy shield will transition to blue, with the reverse happening for the Jackal Miners, who go from blue to red. It's also worth noting that their energy shield is no longer physically connected to the Jackal via the classic oval-shaped emitter. It's now projected a few inches off of the Jackal's wrist via some energy gauntlets that the Jackals now use. But what about those feathered skirmisher things, I hear you cry? And don't worry, my sweet summer child, for now we talk about the skirmishers. Skirmishers are a new variant of the Jackal encountered in the game. While Jackals are a bit dorky and clumsy looking, Skirmishers are intelligent and jet-like, with a full head of black feathers. Their elbows also have the same feathers, and rather than having the bulby, goofy eyes of a jackal, Skirmishers have sharp, bird-like eyes. The Skirmishers' head structure is almost identical to their jackal cousins, with the obvious difference being the keratin-like armor that covers their squishy jackal face and lower jaw. On our own planet, many species of bird actually grow keratin-like armor over their faces and heads, and if we look at some of the concept art for the Skirmishers, this bone-like helmet does seem to be organic and naturally grown over their head. On a side note, this piece of Skirmisher concept art from Isaac Hannaford has the Skirmisher sporting a tail of feathers and broad shoulder armor that almost makes the Skirmisher look like it's wearing those coat-tail military uniforms seen by the French and British military hundreds of years ago. I wonder if the intention was to make the Skirmishers seem like they're kind of the generals of the jackal race. Fascinating stuff. It's also here on the Skirmishers where we actually see a return of those weird red neck glands from Halo 1 and Halo 2, only now it's back with a vengeance. Their entire throat has a deep red sac on it, with smaller bulbs on each side of their face. What could these sacs be for? Storing pee? Perhaps it helps them do that awful call at the beginning of the campaign. Funnily enough, this call that the Skirmisher made was created using a very small dog that was clearly upset about something. During gameplay, the two creatures are quite different from one another. The Jackal of Reach is more akin to its Halo 1 counterpart, losing the ability to sprint from Halo 2 and choosing to instead hobble from fight to fight and offer protection where and when possible. Their pistol and shield hands were actually switched in order to make landing a headshot a lot easier when it flinches after being stunned, the psychology behind this being that it's a lot easier to shoot from the right side of the screen to the left than it is the other way around. Interesting, right? They hold their ground a lot more than they did in previous Halo games, but they do engage the player with some of the most refined and polished set of animations the creature ever had. There's only a couple of downgrades in quality that hold the Reach Jackal back. For starters, its flee animation is a bit mechanical. Rather than throwing its hands over its head and fleeing in terror like in Halo 1, Halo 2, and Halo 3, the Jackals of Reach simply turn around and begin walking away. It's an animation that doesn't convey panic or an attempt to seek cover. It has the same energy as your grandma remembering she left her phone in the other room. Certain ranks of grunts can also overcharge their plasma pistols, and I do feel that that takes a bit away from the Jackal's unique toy box of abilities to use against the player. The shield itself is also a pretty big step down from Halo 3 and Halo 2, with less complex patterns, toned down bloom, and of course the absence of the heat distortion effect when damaged, making the shield duller and less vibrant looking. This was probably done to make it easier to see the Jackal through the shield, but it doesn't stop it from just looking a bit like a Lego version of an energy shield to me. It's just a bit dull and not interesting to look at compared to Halo 2 and Halo 3's shields. Now, the Skirmishers, on the other hand, are very interesting to look at. They make use of the Halo 2 Jackal's sprint ability, as well as dashing and darting about the battlefields, being an incredibly difficult target to pin down when on harder difficulties. The Skirmishers hunt the player in packs, giving chase if the player tries to flee, and tending to group up to focus fire before scattering to confuse and disorient the player. They croak and chatter in a heavily distorted version of the Jackal's own voice lines from Halo 3, and the Skirmishers even have their own version of Wadada. They can leap great distances to get to tall buildings, and even have their own sniper variants that are just as mobile as they are deadly. Higher-ranking skirmishers, such as the Marmello, come with energy gauntlets to deflect incoming shots to its face. Skirmisher champions and commandos will even occasionally make use of hologram armor abilities to trick the player. At the time, Bungie said the reason the skirmisher never showed up in Halo 1, 2, or 3 is due to their numbers being all but extinguished during the invasion of Reach. This is, frankly, a pretty weak excuse, but their exclusivity to Halo Reach further added to the mystique and uniqueness of the skirmisher, and a cult fanbase was all but guaranteed for these fine-feathered finks. While the game itself did a great job of expanding the history and role of the Jackal species, the copy of Halsey's journal that came bundled with the limited and legendary edition copies of Halo Reach provided some fun insight as well. One journal entry was dedicated to the Jackals, their anatomy, and their shield gauntlets, and it's a fascinating read. The Jackals of Halo Reach are the culmination of everything the franchise had been building towards, the seed planted in Halo 1. Reaching full maturity almost a decade later. But what would happen if this design found its way back into Halo 1? In 2011, Halo's new custodian, 343 Industries, partnered with Saber Interactive to release Halo Combat Evolved Anniversary, a remaster of the first Halo game with an updated art style, updated audio, and new ways to play and enjoy the game through online co-op, collectible skulls, and more. It was supposed to be a celebration of the first game's 10th anniversary, and that's a good pitch, right? Well, it wasn't all perfect. The artistic glow-up was less of a faithful update to the original game's vibes and more of a random mess of assets from Halo Reach and Halo 3, with new environments that, at best, didn't really capture the vibes of the original game, and at worst, absolutely ruined them. The poor art direction is apparent with one look at how the Anniversary Edition uses its models. Sometimes, like in the case of the Grunts, the animations lined up well enough with the Reach models. But quite often, the models simply didn't fit the animations well, and the Jackals were probably hit the hardest by this. They just look stupid. The long neck of the Reach Jackal is squished down in this awkward way. The shoulders are unnaturally broadened out, and it makes it look like the Halo Reach Jackal was hit over the head with a cartoon mallet. The problems get even worse when you look closely. The eyelids were completely removed from the Reach Jackal. The shield clearly isn't coming out of the emitters that are attached to their wrist, it's just floating awkwardly. Some of the spines on the back of the head aren't even attached. Come on, guys. It does the Halo 1 Jackal a disservice by not looking remotely like the Halo 1 Jackal. And it does the Reach Jackal a disservice by messing up this beautiful model so badly just to fit into an animation skeleton that it clearly wasn't designed for. It should also be mentioned that due to the remaster being built off the Gearbox Software PC port instead of the original Bungie Xbox release, when switching to the classic graphics, the Jackal shields inherited a legacy bug from that Gearbox port that made all the game's transparent textures glitched. To Saber's credit, they did color these broken textures blue and yellow to distinguish the ranks because the original Gearbox port just left all the Jackal shields an ugly, buggy looking green. But still, these shields wouldn't react to gunshots, and they just weren't the original animated textures that Bungie used in their game, which unfortunately led many gamers to believe that the original Halo was a far worse looking game than it really was when using the classic graphics mode. Despite being a celebration of the original game's 10th anniversary, Halo Combat Evolved Anniversary felt like a rushed, last-minute, slapped-together lemonade stand with the name Halo misspelled in Sharpie on the sign. The new gameplay features were nice, and it did look good graphically for an Xbox 360 game, but the whole package just wasn't respectful of the original game. Imagine what could have been if all this effort went into actually respecting the vibes of the original Halo release. A shameful display, and the Jackals certainly deserved better. Two years after Bungie's farewell to the Halo series, 343 Industries released Halo 4. the game that kickstarted a new era for Halo, dubbed by 343 Industries the Reclaimer Saga. A collection of games, books, and media that told new stories rooted deeply in the fiction of Halo with an artistic makeover headed by industry artist veterans Kenneth Scott and Sparth. Every corner of the Halo universe saw top-to-bottom redesigns. Some were iterative, but most transformative, and the Covenant saw some of the most interesting redesigns. The goal was to get away from the more anime-influenced and stylized Covenant creatures and into something more overgrown and monstrous, with armor and weaponry that were more insect and bug-like in nature. When designing the Jackal, 343's artists kept the general silhouette familiar to players. Original explorations kept some of the Bungie hallmarks, such as the large beak-like snout. But as the creature began to come into being, a new face soon took shape. One that would be the Jackal's de facto look for the Reclaimer Saga. The Jackals of the Reclaimer Saga are a fantastic bit of creature design, even if they are extremely different from the lineage of Jackals that came before. The massive, goofy eyes of the Bungie era were traded out for small, striking, predatory yellow eyes, kinda like the ones seen on the skirmishers in Reach. Rather than a beak-like snout, the Reclaimer Saga Jackals have a completely new lizard-like head with a massive crooked underbite and smile that stretches all the way past their eyes and up to the small ear holes on each side of the head. Jagged and sharp teeth fill these massive mouths, with some teeth even growing next to their eyes. Gross, yet interesting. The glands from Halo 1 and 2 are back, baby, being located on each side of their necks. Oh, speaking of which, the Jackal's new necks are far thicker and fatter this time around. And, rather weirdly, on their posterior is a small stubby little tail. Their armor is far more organic this time around too, ditching the straps, metal plates, and space pirate vibe of the past armors in favor of extremely beetly and insectoid alien armor with a segmented spine that goes down their backs to their new tails. It actually looks quite similar in technology to the armors seen on the new Elite design as well. Perhaps the Elites are giving the Jackals their hand-me-downs? The Jackal Majors get a pretty snazzy looking helmet with a horn on the front, as well as a return of that classic yellow color for their shields. Jackal Snipers get a helmet that has an ominous red glowing eye.
Look out!
And in hazardous environments, Jackals will don spacesuits that come with thruster packs, making them look like little lizard astronaut men. The explanation given at the time was that this design is a new subspecies of the Jackal race, but in the real world, the kind of morphological differences in the skull alone are enough that this isn't just a subspecies. As an example, dogs may initially look different due to selective breeding throughout human history, but all dogs have a similar skull structure under their skin, with the only real differences between breeds being the proportions of that skull. In the Jackal's case, a difference of this scale would allow 343 to technically classify these Jackals as a new species of creature if they so desired. If you'd like to read more, I left a link to a great analysis from 2013 on this very topic. The classic oval-shaped shield emitters are swapped out for this tricorn-like shape that opens up to release the energy shield when activated. The actual shield itself still isn't quite as pretty or bloomy as the Halo 2 and Halo 3 energy shields in my opinion, but it looks so much nicer than Halo Reach's. Unfortunately, the audio work for the Halo 4 Jackals are a bit less interesting this time around. They do speak in Halo 4, but I wouldn't blame you if you never noticed due to the pretty noisy and scratchy audio mixing of Halo 4 that often prioritizes their comically loud footsteps. And their voice lines in general are just brief, unremarkable, and kind of infrequent, even if the actual filters and audio mixing for the voice lines are all on point and sound very jackally. I mean, they don't even give you a little "wadada" upon seeing you. Come on, man. During combat, the Jackals of Halo 4 have some pretty polished character animations. Though, it does need to be said, they do lack a bit of personality even if they are polished. They don't emote too much during combat, and outside of some extremely high-quality scripted animations, such as the assassination animations, or specific moments in the campaign, their normal gameplay animation set is kinda mundane. Previous Jackals panicked, fled, relaxed, stood up straight, snapped their jaws, stomped their feet, pointed at the player, screaming, etc. Halo 4, in comparison, is a tad robotic, with a shallower range of emotions in its animation and behaviors. 343 also gave the Halo 4 Jackals this odd hop that they do when turning around, and when coupled with some AI bugs and pathfinding issues that plagued Halo 4, it can lead to this pretty sweet dance move that the Jackals do when they get caught in a hopping loop. During combat, they're a bit stale to go up against as well, unfortunately, with a generous hitbox around their hands and heads, making them the easiest Jackals in the series to stun, and when combined with their rather slow, absent-minded AI, groups of Jackals are extremely easy to just push through and run over, even on higher difficulties. It's also in Halo 4 where grunts began to overcharge their plasma pistols far more frequently than even Halo Reach, which just sort of made the Jackals doing it less special. And when combined with the Covenant being able to explode the player with just a few needler shots, being an insta-kill on harder difficulties, the Halo 4 Jackals just end up feeling a bit boring to fight or frustrating to fight when they randomly, without warning, insta-kill you with a needler. I know, it doesn't sound that great, and at the time, it honestly wasn't that great. The AI felt like a bit of a downgrade from the previous games, and despite a brand new design with a lot of personality ready to show off for itself, the animations, behavior, and especially sound design presented this new take on the Jackal in an extremely boring and kinda sterile way. Combine this with the mixed reception to the artistic redesign, and said artistic redesign being mangled a bit by some pretty heavy texture compression on the Xbox 360, and it was, in 2012, a low point for the Jackals. Thankfully, that's not where this Jackal's design ends, because in 2015, 343 released Halo 5 Guardians, the final mainline entry in the Reclaimer saga, and the artistic endpoint for this era's aesthetic goals, utilizing new PBR rendering techniques, higher fidelity models, and far, far better texture quality. The Jackals of Halo 5 more than make up for some of the shortcomings on Halo 4. The better texture quality and materials give the Jackals of Halo 5 the depth and detail they deserved. Everything from their teeth to the veins on their eyes are given an astonishing amount of love and care. What was once blurry, muddy, and compressed now comes through with perfect clarity. The shield effect too even saw some updates, blooming rather nicely in dark environments and pulsing in this really mesmerizing way that reminds me a bit of a pond's surface rippling. Unfortunately, there are some catches. Due to 343's sorta rushed PBR conversion of their assets and the lighting engine of Halo 5 lacking in a few areas, the Jackal's appearance can kind of vary depending on the lighting conditions. In broad sunlight, the Jackals look so good. In shadow though, all depth and detail seemingly vanishes from the model, and they kinda end up looking a bit flat. In some instances, they look almost broken. Look at that odd metallic looking skin. What's going on here? As for animations, there's some good news and some bad news. The good news is they got a whole host of new, more expressive reaction animations in combat. The bad news? You probably won't notice them due to a performance optimization method that 343 used to get the game to 60 FPS. Anything beyond a few feet of the player will have the frame rate of their animations slashed. And the frame rate of the animations will keep getting lower and lower as they get further and further away from you. It's really hard to appreciate the Jackal's updated production value since they constantly run out of sync with the game's frame rate. They almost look like Doom sprites at times. I can't imagine the pain and agony the animators at 343 felt when the choice was made to do this to optimize the game. The Jackals were also given a new ability in combat, the ability to melee players if they get too close. And just like the grunts who have the same ability, this is a design choice I actually don't like. It makes sense for the elites because they're supposed to be kind of like the Covenant's analog to the players, being able to use the same abilities the player uses. But for grunts and jackals, those are creatures that are designed for the player to get close to. So giving them an ability that discourages the player from getting up close and personal, I don't know, it seems kind of contradictory to the whole point of those creatures, at least to me. We haven't talked about the audio though. What about their audio? Why am I holding that back? Well, believe it or not, 343 Industries made the choice to let the Jackals speak in the player's native language, letting us, for the first time ever, hear the Jackals plot, scheme, and complain when fighting the player. And the voice direction they selected was perfect. The jackals squawk and screech like angry, gun-wielding birds. This choice also allowed 343 Industries to introduce the players in-game to the concept of the jackals being pirates and scavengers through their dialogue.
One last bounty, then retire.
The jackals also play a pretty big part in some story moments in the campaign. In the second level, called Ghost Ship during development, players are sent to an abandoned spacecraft, Argent Moon. The ship was an Oni research facility where dark and evil experiments were conducted on captive jackals by human scientists trying to engineer a bioweapon to target specific Covenant species. The bioweapon escaped the labs and killed everyone on board, leaving the ship a dimly lit, spacefaring coffin of skeletons and secrets. The derelict ship was eventually found by jackal scavengers and sold to a Covenant remnant group for a profit. And then, later on in the campaign, the Jackals joined forces with these Covenant remnants in attempting to assassinate the elite known as the Arbiter on his homeworld of Sanghelios. While the classic Jackal design from Bungie didn't fit 343's new art direction for their mainline games, the comics allowed for a bit more freedom when it came to the art. In the Reclaimer Saga comic series, Halo Escalation, both the Bungie-style Jackal and 343 Jackal can be seen fighting side by side. This was a really cool moment for Halo fans, and it actually came to happen due to a 343 writer named Jeff Easterling, who fought hard behind the scenes for both Jackal designs to be incorporated into the comic rather than just using the Reclaimer Saga Jackals. Thank you, Jeff. The Jackals of the Reclaimer Saga were fascinating. As a design, it's a pretty solid bit of creature work, feeling really at home in the Halo universe, but maybe not as the look for the Jackal? Bungie had many different looks for their Jackal, but you could see the iterative, artistic process that eventually landed with Halo Reach's Jackal design. But sometimes, new ideas can be just what Halo needs. The concept of the Jackals speaking English or Spanish or whatever language you prefer allowed players to finally get into the heads of these creatures and understand what drove them. And it was a decision that fans actually really enjoyed.
Learn my skill talk. I shoot mouth, big water end.
A question remains though, what do you prefer? Do you prefer the Jackals speaking their own private language, chattering and feeling distant from other Covenant members? Or do you like the Jackals chatting it up in English with their fellow Covenant?
Take the kills!
This was a question posed to me by a writer at 343 in 2018 when I visited the studio, and honestly, I don't know which I prefer. Rather interestingly, the writer preferred the Bungie style of Jackal, since he felt it made the Jackals seem like they don't trust their fellow Covenant. They choose to speak their own languages and keep to themselves socially. It's an interesting point, which is why I now pass the question off to you. I'm not sure which I prefer. Years later, this Reclaimer Saga Jackal design has grown to be appreciated by fans, like the skirmisher before it, now having its own little cult fan group. But before we discuss Halo Infinite, let's go over the various takes on Jackals and spin-off material. Behind the scenes and beyond just the mainline games, the Jackals have a colorful history that is fun to dive into. As an example, one of Halo's famous cancelled projects was an MMO codenamed Orion, and later Titan. The MMO was going to be set during the heights of the Forerunner Empire and give players a glimpse at the pre-Halo Array state of the Halo universe. Think Knights of the Old Republic, but for Halo. Despite not being formally the Covenant at that time, the creatures that eventually made up the modern-day Covenant were present during this period, and the Jackals specifically were incredibly interesting. Due to the game being developed between 2004 and 2007, the Jackals were essentially a refined and polished version of Halo 2's Jackal design, though far more piratey this time around. They've got it all, man. Tattoos, bandoliers of something, plates of armor held with leather straps, weird side nostrils, and some wild pink hair and eyes. I wish I lived in a timeline where this MMO came out. Did at least release the cult classic RTS, Halo Wars. Pulling on many different eras to inspire the design, the concept art and early model explorations for the Jackal were pretty cool. Some versions were more tribal in concept. Others a bit closer to how the Jackals were beginning to look in the mainline Bungie games. I'm personally quite a fan of this early design that sported some pretty sweet goggles and a quill goatee. The designs explored by Halo Wars did go on to inspire the designs for the Jackals in the Halo Legends short film, The Package. Not too sure how I feel about this one, which doesn't seem to be wearing an undersuit. Maybe they were taking a shower when the Master Chief attacked? When the Master Chief Collection launched in 2014, Saber Interactive was brought back to give the fan-favorite Halo 2 the old anniversary treatment, and thankfully, it was a much better production this time around, with an aesthetic makeover that was more faithful to the original game than Halo Combat Evolved Anniversary was. Well, yes, many Reach assets were still being reused for the remaster. This time around, the Reach Jackal model did fit the animation skeleton of the Halo 2 Jackal much better. Some modifications were made, such as giving them glowing pink eyes, as well as the Jackal snipers getting the Reach headsets, complete with a purple glow. I still wish new models were made for the Jackals that were in the spirit of the original designs, but I'm still ultimately satisfied with the work done for Halo 2 Anniversary, except for one issue. Due to Halo 2 Anniversary being built off the Vista PC port of Halo 2, all enemy AI, fire rate, and behaviors are affected by an increased under-the-hood tick rate. This causes enemies to react faster to the player, fire their weapons quicker, and yes, snipe quicker. The Jackal snipers were a difficult enemy already, but if you play Halo 2 on the Master Chief Collection, you're essentially experiencing Halo 2 Extra Hard Mode, due to how much more aggressive the Jackal snipers are in the Master Chief Collection version of the fan-favorite game. It's something 343 never fixed for the MCC, and it bugs me to this day. Another small issue that I have related to the Jackal snipers is that weird ghostly floating ring that's on their wrists. It's a part of the actual shield effect that wasn't disabled when Jackals are given sniper rifles. Oh yeah, and the shield itself still isn't attached to a shield emitter of any kind, it just floats off of the wrist. Come on guys, you can do better than that. Now, the cutscenes for Halo 2 Anniversary were done by Blur Studio, who I think most can agree breathed quite a bit of life into the various Covenant members and creatures. As an example, during the Delta Halo drop sequence, the original game saw a lone Jackal and Grunt just sort of hanging out before noticing the approaching UNSC forces from the sky. In the remaster, the Jackal is bullying the poor Grunt, dangling its stuffed animal just out of reach as the poor little guy cries and struggles to get it back. What an asshole. You want to see the CGI asset that Blur used for the Jackal? Here it is. Pretty nuts seeing the Jackal in this level of fidelity, huh? What's even more nuts than that is the design that went on to appear in Halo the series on Paramount+. The show itself, announced in 2013, ended up in various states of production hell for nearly a decade. It did eventually release and told an alternate story set in a new timeline for Halo, divorced from the games. In Season 1's 5th episode, the Jackals made their first appearance, sporting a design that is an interesting mashup of Halo Reach and Halo 4 traits. The armor is obviously more Halo Reach, and so are some of the facial features, such as the long snout, skin tone, and head silhouette, but the neck and more overtly lizard-like traits were brought over from the Halo 4 design. Another interesting difference is, in the show, the Jackal's blood is colored red or orange, while in the games it's more of a pretty blue or violet. In fact, during a particularly morbid sequence in the show, a bisected Jackal is seen crawling out of the wreckage of a crashed Phantom before dying. That's some nasty stuff. In Season 2, the Jackal design saw some pretty dramatic touch-ups to fit the new, grittier, and less saturated art direction for the show. The Jackals of Season 2 are darker in hide color and resemble T-Rexes in head shape. Their voices are also far, far deeper and more dinosaur-like. It's a very strange look for the Jackals, but you know what? Us Halo fans are used to the Jackals just constantly looking different. And now, it's time to turn our eyes to the latest entry in the Halo series. In 2017, Halo fans were introduced to a new threat. Birthed from the ashes of the Covenant Empire, a brute war machine with a ferocity and military focus with no care for religious dogma slowing their domination of the galaxy. The Banished welcomed all who felt disillusioned by the religious lies of the Covenant and their various splinter religions, cults, and leaders. It was an exciting time for Halo fans. The first Halo game with a new enemy foe that had new motivations and cultures to explore. The Banished were a bit like angry monkey Vikings, pillaging, raiding, and willing to use anything they found to benefit their conquest. What's interesting, though, is something was absent in their debut game, Halo Wars 2. Your usuals were in the Banished: grunts, brutes, elites, even engineers. But there were no Jackals. Jeremy Cook, the art director of Halo Wars 2, told me back in 2018 that the choice to not have Jackals was so that the Banished felt different from the Covenant, using new units and sporting unique silhouettes that Halo players weren't used to seeing. Needless to say, the Banished were a smash hit with fans, but the forces faced by players were just a fraction of the Banished's massive army. And for the next mainline game in the Halo series, the Banished would finally bare their teeth in first person, and Jackals would be joining the fight. When it comes to the Banished Jackals, everything is perfect. Perfect, down to the last minute details. Retiring the Reclaimer Saga Jackal, Halo Infinite's Jackal is a beautifully perfected update to the design from Halo Reach, with plenty of modifications to bring out more of the creature's personality and enhance the expressiveness. The length of the limbs and torso were modified to give them a bit more flexibility and lower the risk of limbs clipping into each other. Their necks were made longer and the head slightly bigger to give them just a funnier look. The beak-like snout is back, just with far more gruesome detail, giving their snarl a level of detail we could have only dreamed of on the Xbox 360. Each individual tooth is even modeled this time. Their eyes are an emotion machine, squinting, blinking, and glancing around curiously and full of so much life and thought. If you get really close, you can see that the eyeballs themselves are extremely detailed, and they even reflect their surroundings. That's an insane level of detail. The skin itself is also just good enough to kiss. You can make out veins and muscles underneath their skin. Look at those hands. Look at those nails. Mwah! The quills on their heads are also a lot more complementary to their silhouette, flaring out to make their heads stick out more when idly patrolling or just doing bird-brained things. Their armor, as you've probably noticed, has returned to the old style of design. The Banished Jackals have traded out the overgrown, bug-like armor from the Reclaimer Saga for classic space pirate armor. Leather undersuits with plates, vests, pauldrons, etc. held on with straps, buckles, and ties. They have many variations too, slightly different pauldrons, the occasional helmet, and of course, beautiful, juicy colors to separate the ranks. The banished freebooter is colored the classic blue of the Jackal miners. The banished raiders, which are the new major rank, are given the banished red. And then there's the occasional wildcard armor that's just frankly a lovely shade of purple. The energy shields, given beautiful life by 343 senior VFX artist Forrest Baker, are a work of art. My conversation with Forrest about this was actually a lot of fun, and it's super interesting to hear his side of the story. He was really fascinated by the strands in our irises that radiate from the center like lightning. He pored over countless references of eyes, and in them, he saw a jackal shield. He also got really good at drying out lemons, oranges, and limes before the lockdowns of 2020, and he even began seeing jackal shields in those too. What's also interesting is the jackal shields don't get red as they get close to death in this game. According to Forrest, he wanted to establish a bit of a technology link to the Elite's shields, so in Halo Infinite, the jackal shields will get whiter and whiter before popping, just like the Elites. Complete this with the perfect shade of blue and gold that I have ever seen, and Halo Infinite's jackal shields look good enough to take a bite out of. Unfortunately, at the time of writing, the blue jackal shield has a bug that causes its activation effect to not play out correctly. See that odd stripy pattern? Yeah, that's not supposed to happen. I'm not sure when this bug was introduced, but it wasn't there at launch, and when I showed Forrest, his heart broke. Jackal snipers also return, armed with the new Stalker rifles. Jackal snipers are identifiable by their headsets that come in a variety of configurations, but all give off a unique, beautifully animated glow when targeting prey, also done by Forrest Baker. Most games do a generic scope glint when snipers target the player, but Forrest wanted the Jackal sniper's glare to feel grounded in the game world. He didn't want to be lazy. A holographic display pops up and a series of rings begin rotating and zeroing in as the Jackal calculates wind speeds and distance to the player. A red laser then begins to focus on the player, and then, when the headset and the laser are synced up, the sniper lets off a volley of shots. What's also nuts is the skirmishers make a return, over a decade after Halo Reach was released. In Halo Infinite, the role of the skirmisher is handled by female jackals, who don familiar headsets and armor that give them the appearance of the fearsome bird-like creatures fought on Reach as a sign of importance and respect for their fallen flock. They also have their energy gauntlets, which were handled by Patrick Starr. Nah, I'm just kidding, I was seeing if you were paying attention. It was also done by Forrest Baker. The Jackals also still talk English, sometimes even repeating fan-favorite lines from Halo 5.
One last bounty, then retire. Live in cottage by lake. Shoot fish.
I hope that Jackal is able to retire soon. Their vocal delivery is on point as ever, with a nice alien filter distorting their voices and making them sound inhumanly.
Flightless animals.
The skirmishers also, likewise, sound fantastically alien and distorted, screeching orders in broken English with their extraterrestrial vocal cords.
Still have human flesh and teeth.
Let's talk gameplay. Across the board, Halo Infinite's Jackals have the best, most expressive animation set in series history, which is complemented by the incredibly smart tweaks and improvements made to the Reach design's proportions. When not in combat, they can be seen bobbing their heads and shuffling around, something not seen since ODST. And during combat, they can occasionally get overwhelmed by the player, which causes them to tremble in fear, flinging their hands over their heads and just fleeing in terror. Again, not seen in over a decade.
Let's all do a big runaway!
They're just very easy to read and predict in combat, and it makes fighting them a real treat. Except for the melee ability when getting too close. Again, still not a fan of that. The Jackal shield users are the support units, providing mobile cover for their banished brethren and slowing the player's advances with their shield blockades. Not that that's gonna stop you much. In the campaign mode, they're extremely susceptible to the grapple shot, which won't grab onto their shields but instead knock the Jackal off balance. If playing modes like Firefight, where a grappling hook may not always be accessible, shooting the hand or just using a good old grenade does the trick just fine. Jackal snipers tend to stay back and avoid getting close to the player, using their headsets to line up shots and land hits. Thankfully, that headset glows quite aggressively when trained on you, and that faint red laser gives away their position, and if you see it, it means it's time to return fire, or at least find a place to hide. The skirmishers are very similar to their Reach incarnations, sprinting about the place, popping in and out of cover, and despite having energy gauntlets, they tend not to protect their faces with them. They instead use them to attack the player, getting in close to land a few slashes before regrouping with their flock for another attack. They're perhaps one of the most deadly banished forces found in Outposts, not because of their ability to kill the player, but their ability to close long distances quickly and keep your shields down so that by the time elites and brutes show up, they can take you out because you're vulnerable. Like Halo 5 before it, Halo Infinite is also a game that explores the cultures of the Jackal through ambient dialogue that can be overheard.
Who wants to hear the longest burp in the Banished, huh? Wait. Oh no, it's stuck!
Need more bullets. Fix Grunt's problem.
Man, you gotta relax, stupid Jackal.
With the inclusion of female Jackals for the first time during gameplay, it's also here where players learn in-game an interesting fact about the species from the Halo books. Jackals are a matriarchal species. Females are held in high regard by male Jackals, who will steal, kill, or do just about anything to please their ship mistresses. Basically, it's an entire species of bird pirates that are just really down bad. Across the surface of the ring, various high-value targets can be found. Rithkul was a ship mistress for the Covenant during their war with humanity. After the Covenant's collapse, she became just another pirate before finding a home with the Banished. Upon killing her, the player can get access to her special Ultra Needler.
No profit when work for profit.
Baroth is far more underhanded in his history. His sharpshooting abilities made him notorious in the Banished, and he hopes to, one day, become a fully fledged Spartan killer. If killed, players get access to his special Ultra Stalker rifle. During development, the Jackals of Halo Infinite almost had an even larger presence, with high-value targets being far more fleshed out. It was even on the table at one point to have a skirmisher be part of the Spartan killers in the story before such ideas were scaled back for production reasons. As it sits, Halo Infinite's Jackals are perhaps the most fleshed out and well-realized incarnation of the Jackal. Their new models, their wonderful animations, and just their general behaviors and attitudes in combat make the Infinite Jackals feel final. This is the best that it's ever been for the creature, and it makes me excited to think about what could happen next. But of course, those are just my thoughts. The history of the Jackals are a fun one to explore, from humble beginnings in 2001 to a flock of bird pirate Kens just trying to please their bird pirate Barbies. The Jackals have consistently been an important part of why Halo's combat loop has stayed so timeless. Who knows where the Jackals will end up next, and what form they'll take or what silly nonsense they'll be up to. One thing is for certain, if we see those familiar energy shields coming at us, aim for the hands. What's your favorite incarnation of the Jackal? What would you like to see me cover next? Oh, and share the video around to your friends, neighbors. If you own a bird, show the video to your bird. I'm sure they'll enjoy it. A huge thank you to the folks who helped make this video possible, and without further ado, it's time for my impression of a jackal.
Wakakak. Back. Back. Spartan. Polly, what a cracker.
Okay, I'll do it for real.
Kigyar job is just beach. Kigyar found in giant supermarket. Rotisserie chicken.